Shadows Ablaze Prologue. The tyrant's vision in the heart of the night, beneath a starless sky shrouded by swirling dark clouds, the palace of tyrant Silas loomed like a monument to his ruthless ambitions. The massive structure, with its imposing spires and shadowed corridors, stood at the center of Vironas, a sprawling city that had grown around the palace like weeds around a stone. Silas, sitting before a vast obsidian table in his private study, remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the giant map that dominated the wall opposite him. The map detailed not just the vast empire of Eryx, but also the neighboring realms that had yet to fall under his iron grasp. Candles flickered, casting an eerie glow that seemed to dance in tune with the storm brewing outside. Their light reflected sharply off his piercing eyes, betraying a mind at work on plans darker than the night itself. The room was filled with the scent of aging parchment and the iron tang of an impending storm. Outside, the wind howled like the cries of those who had fallen victim to his conquests. Yet, within these walls, a sinister silence prevailed, as if the palace itself held its breath in anticipation. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a figure cloaked in shadow entered, his steps soundless on the cold stone floor. The visitor, known only as the Seer, was Silas's most trusted advisor, a man whose foresight had guided many of his victories. "My lord," the Seer's voice was a whisper, yet it carried a weight that immediately drew Silas's attention. "The vision has clarified. The shadows have spoken again." Silas turned, his interest piqued. "And, speak plainly. The chains of fate are aligning. But there is a threat, one that could undermine your reign. It arises from the west, hidden in the shadows of rebellion. A spark that, if not extinguished, could set your world ablaze." A grim smile touched Silas's lips. This was the game he relished, plots and counterplots, threats emerging and being quashed under his indomitable will. "Tell me then, what must be done to crush this spark?" The Seer hesitated, his fingers tracing invisible lines in the air, as if he could pluck the answers from the very essence of the shadows. "It is not one action, but many. A series of events that must be set into motion. You must weave a web of deception, manipulate allies and enemies alike, and extinguish hope where it dares to surface." Listening intently, Silas's mind raced through scenarios, each more ruthless than the last. "Begin at the roots, then. We will infiltrate these rebels, sow discord and confusion. We will use their fears against them, as you command, my lord. But beware. The roots of rebellion are tangled and deep. They feed on despair and grow in the dark. Your spies must be as shadows themselves, unseen yet all-seeing." Silas nodded. His empire had been built on the pillars of fear and power, each conquest feeding into the legend of his invincibility. Yet, he was no fool to ignore the counsel of his Seer. "What of the realms yet unconquered? Shall we halt our expansions to focus on this threat?" "No, my lord. Expansion must continue. Show the world your strength. Let none doubt your resolve or the reach of your power. But keep your gaze inward as well, for the enemy often wears the guise of the ally." The tyrant rose from his seat, his figure casting a long shadow over the map, the borders of which seemed almost to cower. "Very well. Prepare the orders. We will strike swiftly and silently. By dawn, I want our agents in place, and by dusk, I want reports on my desk." The Seer bowed deeply, his form retreating into the darkness from which he had come. Alone once more, Silas turned back to the map. His finger traced the borders of his realm and beyond, each line a tether to a land that would either bow to him or burn. As the storm outside reached its crescendo, so too did his resolve. Silas knew that control was maintained not just through strength, but through the omnipresent threat of its use. His vision was clear as the rain that began to lash against the stone and glass of his fortress. He would quell this rebellion before it could begin, and his empire would stand eternal, unassailable, with him as its everlasting sovereign. With a final glance at the swirling tempest outside, a perfect mirror to the turmoil he intended to unleash, tyrant Silas turned away from the window, his thoughts as stormy as the night. "Let the shadows be my sanctuary," he murmured into the darkness. "And let the blaze they fear be the light by which I conquer." Chapter 1. The chessboard in the Grand Council chamber of the Eryxian Palace, the atmosphere was tense. High arched windows threw slices of morning light across the marble floor, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of the intrigues they had witnessed. At the heart of the room stood a vast table, intricately carved, and set with a map of the empire and its bordering nations. This was the chessboard on which tyrant Silas played his deadly games of power. Around the table, his council gathered, generals bedecked in medals, advisors with sharp eyes, and scholars whose knowledge of ancient laws and modern tactics was unparalleled. Each one was a piece in Silas's grand strategy, each one vital to his plans for expansion and control. Yet, beneath their polished exteriors, loyalty was a tenuous thread, stretched thin by fear and ambition. Silas entered the chamber with the quiet authority of a storm cloud on the horizon. His presence commanded silence, and as he took his seat at the head of the table, the final murmurs of conversation died away. "Today," he began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, "we assess our boundaries and prepare for the push into the Delcuri lands. General Arlen, report." General Arlen stood, his uniform crisp, his posture rigid. "My lord, our forces are positioned along the border. The Delcuri, with their fragmented clans, will not withstand our might. However, there is unrest in the southern provinces, rumors of dissent that could threaten the stability of our supply lines." Silas nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And what do you propose?" Arlen's hand moved over the map, stopping over the southern regions. "We tighten control, increase patrols and, if necessary, execute a few ringleaders to quench the fires of rebellion before they spread." "Wise," Silas murmured, though his mind was already weaving through the webs of potential treachery that might lie hidden beneath the surface of such unrest. "Advisor Celia, your insights." Celia, a woman whose sharp intellect was often underestimated by her peers, gave a thin smile. "While General Arlen's plan addresses the immediate symptoms, we might consider a more subtle approach. We infiltrate these so-called dissenters, use them to gather intelligence on any real threats. If we play this right, we could turn potential rebels into unwitting allies." Silas's eyes gleamed with approval. "Proceed with this plan. And now, to the matter of the Delcuri." He shifted his focus, his gaze sweeping over the council like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. "We will not just conquer, we will integrate. Their clans will be dismantled, their leaders replaced. By the end of the year, their children will be learning Eryxian in their schools." The council members nodded, some eagerly, others with masked apprehension. They were well aware of the tyrant's capacity for brutality, but his vision for cultural domination was a newer, more insidious weapon in his arsenal. As the meeting drew to a close, Silas stood and the room fell utterly silent, the weight of his gaze holding each council member in their place. "Remember," he said, his voice low and resonant, "the strength of Eryx does not merely lie in the sharpness of our swords or the range of our archers. It lies in the unity of our command, the depth of our strategies, and the absolute control of our territories." With a final nod, he left the chamber, his council lingering behind to debate and discuss. But high above, in the shadowed recesses of the gallery, watched by none, a figure cloaked in the gray of dawn observed silently. Mara, a spy for the burgeoning resistance, had heard every word. Her heart raced as she considered the implications of Silas's plans, not just for her people in the south but for the entire realm. She slipped away, her steps soundless, her mind racing. The information she had gathered was crucial. The resistance needed to hear of this new strategy, of the tyrant's vision to erase cultures and redraw the boundaries of identity and power. As she made her way through the hidden corridors of the palace, her resolve hardened. The game Silas thought he controlled was changing, and unknown to him, new players were moving onto the chessboard. The resistance was growing, shadows gathering in the places he least expected, and soon, they would make their first move. Chapter 2. Pawns in motion in the flickering torchlight of the Red Tavern's common room, a hub of covert gatherings in the shadowed underbelly of Vironas, whispered conversations meshed with the clinks of ale mugs. Here, cloaked figures huddled over weathered tables, their voices carrying the weight of conspiracy. The tavern, with its labyrinth of hidden exits and warren-like chambers, was a haven for those plotting against tyrant Silas's oppressive rule. At a secluded table sat Talia, once a noblewoman of high birth, now a strategist for the resistance. Her sharp eyes scanned the coded message just delivered by a grimy-faced urchin who had slipped unnoticed into the tavern. The message, encoded in the innocuous language of trade and commerce, spoke of troop movements and supply chains, vital information for their cause. Beside her, Merrick, a burly ex-soldier with scars that told of many battles, leaned in. "What's the word, Talia?" he murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of low conversation. She folded the parchment, tucking it into her tunic. "Silas is extending his reach again. He's targeting the Delcuri lands next, aiming to shatter their clans and erase their culture." Her voice held a steely undertone. "We need to move quickly, coordinate with our contacts there. It's time to stir the hornet's nest." Merrick nodded, his face set in grim resolve. "I'll arrange a meeting with the Delcuri leaders. They won't go down without a fight, but they'll need help organizing. We have to show them they're not alone in this." Talia's gaze swept the room, taking note of the new faces that might be spies for the crown. Trust was a commodity as rare as peace these days. "I'll draft plans for disrupting the supply lines. If we can cut off his resources, slow down the troop movements, it'll give us some breathing room." As they plotted, a newcomer approached, a young woman with the look of the Northlands, fair-haired and blue-eyed, garbed in the travel-stained leathers of a scout. She hesitated, her eyes searching the tavern before settling on Talia and Merrick. With cautious steps, she approached their table. "You're Talia? I was told to find you," she said, her voice a mix of nerves and determination. "I'm Lyra. I've come from the north, from the Free Cities. They sent me to deliver this." She handed over another piece of parchment, sealed with the mark of the Free Cities Council. Talia broke the seal and quickly read the contents, her expression changing subtly as she absorbed the words. "The Free Cities are offering sanctuary and support. They're also sending shipments of supplies and weapons. They want to join forces against Silas." Merrick let out a low whistle. "That's a game changer. With the Free Cities on our side, we could mount a significant resistance." Lyra nodded, sitting down as she glanced around nervously. "There's more. They've spotted unusual activity in the western passes. Troops moving in secrecy, likely for a surprise assault on the Delcuri. They think Silas wants to strike hard and fast before any alliance can be formed." The gravity of the situation settled over the group like a cloak. Talia tapped the table thoughtfully. "We need to send warning to the Delcuri immediately. Lyra, can you get a message to them?" "I can," Lyra confirmed, her resolve firming. "I know the passes. I can make it through." "Then go," Talia said, her command carrying the weight of necessity. "Merrick, gather a few trusted fighters. You're heading to the Delcuri lands. Help them prepare. I'll stay here and coordinate our efforts from Vironas." As they dispersed, each to their tasks, the weight of their responsibilities bore down on them. Outside, the night deepened, casting shadows that seemed to press against the windows of the Red Tavern. In the dim light, Talia reviewed the maps and messages, plotting her next moves. The game was indeed changing, and they were all pawns in motion, but she intended to play with the cunning required to win not just battles but the war. In the shadows of the city and the wider world, the resistance was gathering strength, driven by the hope that together, they could topple a tyrant. The battle to come would be fierce, and the sacrifices great, but the flame of rebellion was lit, and like a fire in the dry woods of Eryx, it would spread. Chapter 3. The Puppet Master in a secluded chamber within the labyrinthine palace of Vironas, deep beneath the cacophony of royal life. A dimly lit room housed a figure known only to a select few as the Puppet Master. His real name, Orin, was seldom spoken, and his role was shrouded in as much secrecy as it was in influence. Here, amid scrolls and shadowy alcoves, Orin orchestrated the unseen machinations that kept Tyrant Silas's enemies at bay and his allies in line. The walls, lined with maps and charts, bore the marks of a meticulous mind. Strings stretched across the parchment, connecting pins and notes, a tangible representation of the web Orin wove daily. Each thread signified an alliance, a blackmail, or a threat, a control mechanism designed to manipulate the political landscape to Silas's favor. As Orin leaned over a sprawling map of Eryx and its neighboring states, his assistant, a young, sharp-eyed woman named Elia, entered the room. She moved quietly, respecting the sanctity of their work. Master Orin, the latest reports from the north, she announced, placing a stack of documents on the heavy oak desk that dominated the room. Orin's gaze shifted from the map, settling on Elia with an intensity that belied his calm demeanor. "And?" he prompted, his voice a low murmur. "The dissent in the northern provinces is growing," Elia replied, unfolding one of the documents. "Our agents suggest it's being fueled by the influx of ideas from the free cities. There's talk of a rising leader among them, someone capable of uniting the factions." "A uniter is a threat," Orin stated flatly, his hand pausing over a northern territory marked with several red pins. "We need to ensure disunity, plant misinformation, perhaps even fabricate a scandal. Discredit this leader before they gain any substantial following." Elia nodded, making notes. "I will see to it. What of our allies in the Delcuri lands?" After the last council meeting, Silas is determined to push forward with the annexation. Orin turned back to his map, his fingers tracing the routes leading into Delcuri. "We'll tighten our grip, but we must be subtle. Use economic pressures, make it seem advantageous for them to join us. As for those who resist, remove them quietly. Replace them with our loyalists. The Delcuri are proud people," Elia cautioned. "They will not bow easily. That is why we will make them think it was their choice," Orin replied with a sly smile. "The best puppet is one who does not know it is being controlled." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, breathless and bearing urgent news. "Master Orin, a situation develops at the eastern border. A skirmish broke out. It appears our forces may have been provoked." Orin's expression hardened. "This could escalate quickly. We cannot afford a conflict on two fronts. Send word to our commanders to hold their positions but not to engage further. I'll negotiate a truce. It will show strength, yet also restraint, keeping our true intentions concealed." As the messenger departed, Elia looked to Orin with admiration. "You control the chaos," she observed. "It's all about balance, Elia," Orin explained as he returned his attention to the maps. "Keeping Silas's enemies scattered and his allies dependent. Every rebellion, every peace, it's all part of a larger dance, choreographed with the precision of a maestro." Elia absorbed his words, understanding the depth of strategy that governed their actions. She knew that under Orin's guidance, the threads of power and deceit were woven into a tapestry that dictated the fate of not just Eryx, but of all the lands that lay in its shadow. Outside, the world of Eryx moved on, unaware of the puppet master who pulled the strings from his shadowed room. Here, in this dimly lit chamber, the future was decided, not through battles and conquests, but through whispers and schemes. Orin, the unseen architect of power, planned and plotted, ensuring the tyranny of Silas was both imperceptible and inevitable. And as the sun set over Vironas, casting long shadows across the empire, the puppet master's work continued, shaping the destiny of nations with the subtle movements of a chess player in a game where the stakes were empires and lives.